Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat.
And a very good evening to you and welcome to Newsline Zoom. My guest this evening is Dr. Rohantha Athukorala, who of course is rather unique. He's had a remarkable career both in the public sector and in the private sector. And he's done so without so much of a single blemish on his career, which is absolutely rare. I'm sure you will all agree, ladies and gentlemen. So very warm welcome to Dr. Rohantha Athukorala. Welcome to Newsline.
Thank you, Faraz, for having me, and it's a pleasure talking to you again.
Thank you. Now, we are in the midst of, some people say, elections and so on, but we're actually in the midst of several crises. The foreign exchange crisis hasn't really improved at all. We have a political crisis, we have a social crisis, we have a tax crisis, we have every single conceivable crisis going. The prices are sky high. The 62% of the working population are daily waged, and so on and so forth. So, Dr. Athukorala, what do you think is the impact on the economy, on the retail economy?
See, Faraz, you talked about the challenges that we are faced with. A point that I would like to mention is that these are typical economic cycles that happen all over the world. We know how, some of our Sri Lankan companies in places like Vietnam and Cambodia are working 4 days a week because there's a slump in the overall trading in the US and UK. So it has an impact. But we are confounded with a man-made disaster, as you say, where our expenditure was much more than our income. It has not been planned. And I would strongly lay the blame on the overall business model that Sri Lankan policymakers had envisaged for the next 2-3 years, which were wrong. And it's very clear. And today, the common man is been having to suffer. So, if you take a private company and a CEO looks at a business model for the next 3 to 5 years, and the company suddenly finds that its expenditure is more than the income, obviously the CEO gets fired and the whole board gets fired and somebody comes and buys over the company. Now, sadly, in Sri Lanka, the people who put us all into trouble continue to have luxurious life while the common man is absolutely suffering. So you asked me the question about the retail. The challenge is severe. It's severe, and especially in the lower and the low middle income groups. You have almost 28 to 35%, between 28 to 35% of the households who normally buy an average about 48 categories when they go to shop. The different kinds of categories that a typical household would require in a given month has now dropped down to about 28 to 35%, moving out of each of those categories. And almost 500,000 people have moved out of the top 17 categories of Sri Lanka. So like, for example, if you take milk powder, 1.1 million households have moved out. And something that needs to be understood for us is that this data comes at end of December, which is before the payee tax of 35% came to play. So once the new structure comes to play, the latest data shows that between 25 to 35% of people will actually further move out of each of these categories because the household expenditure cannot be maintained with the income that you have. So that's a challenge that we have. And a perception study was done recently by an eminent research company, which shows that do you feel that the extent of cost of living will change in the next 12 months? And 97% of the people say that it's going to deteriorate, which tells you the sentiments that is currently in the marketplace.
And in recent days, we have seen increasing commentary about the lack of the availability of medicine, drugs, and so on, and also paddy. Tell us about the medication angle of it. Is it that serious? How can we get out of this?
See, for us, the point remains is that even with the increase in taxes, we have got only about 154 billion rupees that has been collected in terms of income in the month of January 2023. So whilst that is the income that has come, our expenditure is crosses 200 billion. 92
Right.
billion is happens to be the public sector wages. Then you have about a 20 billion that comes from the people who are in Samurdhi bucket, and then you have another 20 billion virtually for the pension. So it moves out. So whilst the government is focusing on increasing the income by taxing people, in terms of expenditure management, there's been no emphasis that has happened. So obviously, what happens is that when you have a order that comes from the pharmaceutical group for about 3 to 5 billion Sri Lankan rupees, you find that you don't have the funding for that. So the challenge that we have right now is that yet we don't have that kind of sentiment to tell that we are going to save on cost. We have Independence Day celebrations. Initially the report comes out is 300 million. Subsequently, the message that comes out happens to be that it's 17 million. But it's not the denominator what is important for us. It's about your attitude towards cost management. In our organizations, when you say cost management, everybody is in charge of cost management. Every single line item is checked. So right now, what the people are saying is, you're just looking at only income generation, but you're not looking at management of expenditure. So until that kind of orientation comes in, I think we'll have serious issues with regard to procuring the most important human essentials, which happens to be a human rights issue.
And what would you say are those essential items?
Pharmaceutical items, medicine is absolutely crucial. I mean, if somebody makes it accident and they go to government hospital, I mean, having betadine is absolutely a fundamental. So if that is not there, then where do we go from next? It's easy for people to come and say you need to prioritize accidents and also the kinds of surgeries that you're going to do. But then, forget those surgeries for us. If you go to after accident into a hospital and if you don't have betadine, you're severely challenged. So we are in a I like you very rightly said, for us, I'm not a critic who sits on the chair. I have held public sector positions, I've held private sector positions, so I'm hands-on. And all I'm saying is that, this is the most, I would say, the silver lining that I have seen in Sri Lankan economy, because, now today, everybody in the public sector knows that if there's any corruption, the private sector is going to get up because they are severely challenged with regard to their purchasing power. Any unwanted expenditure that will happen from the public sector, people will start questioning it, and they will aggressively question it, because now you are looking at, that extra tuition, extra kind of support you would get to a family is getting hindered. So there is no option, but we will have to reduce our expenditure that Sri Lanka will have to incur. And once we get that,
expenditure on what? Reduce it on what?
Number one is going to be the people who are going to be employed in the public sector. I mean, right now the ratio is something like 1 to 20, for every single person. So, I mean, if that has to come down consciously. Secondly is that each public sector person will have to ask themselves, how am I going to drive productivity? When I say productivity means that, you have a market like India, which is a booming economy. IMF is predicting a 7.3% GDP growth of India, and a middle income which is about 500 million people, and our export business is just yet at around $500 million for the last 10 years. So we have a free trade agreement. The utilization of products is so limited, which tells us those are the opportunities that right now the public sector needs to open those doors, because then the private sector can say, I'm going to increase my exports of tea. I can look at the exports of apparel, which are currently the utilization is between 2 to 5%. So today, because we are challenged, people will start asking themselves, what do I actually do to drive these key KPIs that's going to make a difference in the month of February and March? So I think that to me is the silver lining that I see.
And what of elections? Do we need them?
See, for us, it's all about, in my mind, elections is about selecting your people who can do a job of work. That's how I would look at it. So, for instance, if a set of people who have been selected is not doing their job of work, then you need to give a chance to somebody else to do the job of work. So, for me, elections is not about political parties. It's not about the whims and fancies of people. It's about where people will say, are these guys doing a job of work that they need to be re-elected? If not, who is that group of people that they're going to select? And then you will finally find a particular color that comes out stronger. And that gives an indication to the hierarchy, here is the mandate of the people and the voice of the people. And I think I need to listen to it today.
And Dr. Athukorala, for you personally, as a man who served both the public sector and the private sector, are you sort of uncomfortable with the idea that many of the opposition politicians are looking at the elections as a sort of a platform for shooting off into the next stage of their careers, which is, of course, a parliamentary election? So do you think...
At Darden's Hospital's new Alfred Place wing, we continue to evolve into a purpose-built hospital of the future, with an ambience built to deliver world-class care. Darden's Hospital, dedicated to you.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
And welcome back to Newsline Zoom. I'm in conversation with Dr. Rohantha Athukorala, a man of many roles, all rather successfully, all in the pursuit of serving the people's interests. Dr. Rohantha Athukorala, welcome back to Newsline Zoom. And straight away, I want to ask you, there is some hope and concern in equal terms, probably, about the holding of elections. What will happen if we were to have these local elections? And it's really, I'd hate to say nothing more, but it is largely a litmus test on the existing government of the day. Is that how you perceive it?
Absolutely, for us. These are all, in my view, approval bells. In private sector companies, we do evaluations of people and ask how do people perform. And we do this quarterly. We do it every 6 months and sometimes annually. So this kind of elections are performance appraisals, in my view. Though there's a cost to it, it's good that we are having it, and I think we need to have this. And I think because in my view, the Sri Lankan voter is not a voter which is stupid. We have seen how people who have done outstanding in terms of bringing peace to Sri Lanka getting kicked out because they have not been performing. We have seen this. Sri Lankan consumer is not a stupid. We have seen people who have come in, and then we have the central bank which has been robbed. They are thrown out of the government with just one single, not even a single seat. So, a lot of people think that Sri Lankan consumer is stupid. They are not. And I'm eager to find out what their choice is going to be on the 9th of March.
The 9th of March. What do you think? As a citizen of Sri Lanka and exercising your right of freedom of movement and so on, as you go around about your daily life, what are you observing? What is the feeling of the people of Sri Lanka, your brothers and sisters as much as mine?
See, we don't need to go too far, but obviously right now there is a dissatisfaction with regard to where people don't have money to live. So that definitely has an impact on the kinds of behavior which you see right now on the streets. So there's so much of protests and The middle income now, not only the lower middle income, but even the middle income coming out on the streets and talking about their share of voice of the issues that are held. It just tells you that there is a dissatisfaction. So now the question is that how does the current hierarchy pick up this vibe on the 9th of March? What changes would it make to change the way that they are working to bring about some kind of um, perceptual change among people is actually, to me, the real tipping point of Sri Lanka.
And, as democracy faces choppy waters, if you like, or bumpy roads, we may look at what's happening in India today. Report coming in from India that some authorities in India decided to raid the offices of the BBC for whatever reason. Isn't this, well, to me, this is a bit of bordering on the lines of media suppression and media bullying by big government. But how do you see it from where you're seated in Sri Lanka, looking towards Big Brother India, and you see these reports of this sort of action being taken, or if it's not action, certainly a bit of trying and troubling times for the BBC in New Delhi when they come under scrutiny of presumably the Indian military intelligence authorities?
See, Faraz, I was in India about 2 weeks back on business, and what I saw was that real democracy in action. And the whole country is geared towards growth. You can see the vibrancy of the people when you go to a supermarket. It just talks about the quality of life. Each country has its own way of handling democracy. So, I wouldn't want to comment about what happened in India because I work for a global company also, so it's not right. But all I have to say is that if I look at Sri Lanka, and when I look at 3 different news stations and I see 3 different types of storylines coming out, I see democracy of media in its best.
Right.
But I would love to see a little bit more of share of voice of people being allowed to take place, because end of the day, people's voice is absolutely crucial, and the more that you would suppress the share of voice of people, you would see that it will have an impact on the 9th of March at the decision making time. So maybe the government needs to ask themselves, are they going to wait till the 9th of March for people to give their decision, or should you now itself ask yourself how you need to adjust yourself so that they would have some kind of market share when people's votes are being counted. Otherwise, that it's going to go to a competitor. Simple.
And Dr. Athukorala, what do you say to the people? What should obviously there are several challenges for these if and when these local government elections are being held. What do you say? What is your advice to the people in terms of choosing their local representative?
See, I think, as I said, for us, the Sri Lankan household, the Sri Lankan housewife is not stupid, and, even when it comes to local elections, I remember how my mom one day called me and said, I want you to vote for number 17. And I asked, why do you want me to vote for number 17? And she said, no, they are promising they're going to put street lights across the whole area, in our neighborhood, So it means that, the housewife of today is kind of cognizant of, promises that have been made, and now people are going to be more sharper on the delivery mechanisms when they put their vote. But my only humble recommendation and my advice and my sentiment is that, don't look at a protest vote. Don't protest your anger with a vote, but look at yourself, find out who are the people who has a better chance of doing a job of work. And I think in the attribute of that decision, number 1 would be definitely corruption, because corruption is what has got us into this situation. So obviously a decision-making point would be people who are who are kind of less corrupt or people who have demonstrated that they are not into corruption will definitely get voted. The second point for us, I like to just make a point is that, Sri Lanka is not in a very bad situation, because if you look at our total income that comes into Sri Lanka, you have about, I think, 12 billion, 12.5 billion that comes from exports, and with services, you might get about 15. Then you get about 7 billion that comes from people who are living abroad, which takes us to about 23 billion. And, we know we can hit 3 billion with regard to our tourism. We are going to be $26 billion income. Our expenditure at the best of times was about $2 billion, right? Our import. So if you are looking at a 24 billion expenditure in terms of overall management of the economy, we are safe. But what is important is, how do I manage my domestic expenditure? And for that, the only answer is from the government, because government has to curtail, the expenditure that they incur on wages, pension, and samurdhi. And we know that there's huge questions on the samurdhi recipients. Everybody, IMF, World Bank, everybody talks about saying have targeted some of the recipients than blanket, but we have not seen that in action yet. So I think what all of us must ask ourselves is, how do we support the government to make sure that their expenditure can be reduced, and how do we put pressure on that, like what happened at the Independence Day, so that if that happens, I think Sri Lanka can get out of, will be, it's at tipping point, as I call it, this year.
And finally, Dr. Rohantha Athukorala, tell me, some people say that there is a wave for one party, and that another party will get sort of completely annihilated, and so on. So what do you detect as an observer of matters political? What do you see? Where do you see this wave?
See, for us, I come from a brand marketing background, so we are very strongly data-driven. Now, in the US, you have these omnibus surveys that happen on a weekly basis, and then you can see how certain political brands, get a certain traction. And then subsequently, when the rhetoric changes and the strategy changes in the next week, when that same study is done, subsequently, you can see how the change take place at the consumer end. So unfortunately, in Sri Lanka, we don't have that kind of quantitative studies that happen. But if somebody is going to make a qualitative judgment based on the number of people that you see at a given election rally, and the kind of share of voice that they are commanding on TV, radio, and press and social media, you can just gauge whether the kind of share of mind that they would have and what kind of market share they're going to end up with on the 9th of March. So, I'm taking that kind of model into perspective. And obviously, two brands are coming out strong. It's very clear. And now it's at a pinnacle where each of them are going at each other at every single point. So it just tells you that it's two brands ultimately fighting this game, while certain brands actually, as you very rightly said, is just fading away when they couldn't even find people to even contest the election, leave alone marketing their brand to get people into a election rally. So you're right. Yes, we see two brands coming out very strongly. Too early to say what kind of final decision making of a consumer is, because end of the day, it's a bit of a complex situation that is going on. But all I know is that the decision making will be purely going to be very strongly tilted towards corruption, because corruption is what has got us into this situation. And the people who have plundered money today will not be able to even move out of their houses, because now the consumer has woken up. So to me, it's one of the most tipping point decisions for Sri Lanka. And I know that from this year onwards, when you have a small economy of $70 billion, we were 80 billion before the whole economy shrank by 9% last year. This year, another 3%, if it shrinks, we'll be at about 70 billion. 70 billion economy is very small. I mean, if you take a large motor company, it's a first quarter sales. So, we will turn around very strongly. I know that. But I like to see what the impact of 9th March is going to be, and how this hierarchy is going to take that decision, and see what changes they're going to make.
Dr. Rohantha Athukorala, thank you very much for being on Newsline Zoom. We hope to see you in our studio in the not too distant future. But that's the way it was on Newsline Zoom this evening. Take care. Have a great evening, as much as you can, of course, ahead of you. And as always, I leave you with this message. God bless you all.